Hi everyone. Today we are joined by Manisha Kapoor, who's the head of Advertising Standards Council of India, or in short, ASCI. She's a member of the leadership team at the International Council of Advertising Self-Regulation, also known as ICAS. With over 25 years of experience, Manisha has helped companies establish and nurture brands through brand building, marketing strategy, new product development, and media planning across diverse industries including banking, FMCG, healthcare, and aviation. A strong advocate for ethical advertising, Manisha has also worked extensively on integrating social impact into business strategy, collaborating with corporates, NGOs, and international organizations to develop purpose driven programs. In a world where advertising influences consumer behavior more than ever, how do we ensure truth, transparency, and trust in brand communication? With the rise of digital ads, influencer marketing, and AI driven promotions, the boundaries between ethical advertising and misleading content are blurring.
Once again, thank you so much for joining us, ma'am. We can both quickly introduce ourselves as well. I am Ria, and this is Gayatri. We're both a part of this club called VPod, where we try to get in different guests with us to learn more about their fields, to learn about more about their own journeys. To start us off, the first question is that you have worked with big dream companies like Johnson and Johnson, Kotak, Unilever, and now you are here at ASCI. So, what are the major differences that you feel now that you're on the other side of the table?
Yeah, so I would say that we are all on the same side of the table. I do not see this necessarily as being on the other side of the table. Of course, the roles are different, the objectives of the organizations are different. But I think all of the organizations that you've mentioned also would like for their consumers to see advertising that is truthful and something that consumers can relate with. And I think my role here also is pretty similar to that. So of course, now I don't handle a particular brand or a particular assignment. I'm looking at it from an industry point of view. So yeah, but I think what I can say is that yes, when I was on the other side and we would receive a letter from ASCI asking us to make some changes to our ad or to justify why we had said some things. Of course, as brand managers and as advertisers, you feel you can do no wrong. And therefore, there was always this slight defensiveness that used to come in saying that, but we've thought through something and, this is not a problem. But I think you have to realize that, your ad, if it was just standing by itself, may not have been a problem. But the challenge is that when several ads start to do that, and again, as an industry regulator, we can see several ads doing that, then collectively they definitely can create some doubts in the mind of consumers. They can dampen consumers' trust of advertising, and that is not something that we all want, right? So I think those are the issues or challenges that that I can see from this side, which I probably didn't have an appreciation of earlier.
Makes sense. Um,
So, with influence comes responsibility, and now almost everyone that you see is an influencer. Do you think people find it hard to trust digital media marketing?
I think people do trust digital media and what we are seeing, and particularly with influencers. I think more than the medium itself, the fact that influencers are there who don't behave necessarily like celebrities. They behave like you and me, so they are more relatable, and therefore you can kind of trust them. And I think therefore it's important for all media, but I think particularly for the digital medium to be more trustworthy, for influencers to be very, very careful about what they are saying. Eventually, they have to build the trust of their audience. It's not enough to have followers. Once you have the followers, if you're constantly kind of letting them down, telling them things that are not trustworthy, endorsing brands that you may not have even tried or you don't believe in, or you do paid promotions, but you don't tell your influencers that this is a paid promotion. I mean, eventually all of this just erodes trust. And again, if we see that happening again and again, it erodes the trust in the system itself. And I think if influencers want to have a long career and a, long kind of journey of being successful, then they have to be mindful that the foundations are based in honesty, authenticity, because that is what builds long-term relationships between them and their audiences. So influencer advertising is great. People do trust it. And I think it's for the influencers to ensure that they don't break that trust.
Of course, that makes a lot of sense, ma'am. Just like piggybacking onto what you've already mentioned, that they need to build a lot of trust and authenticity in the content that they're creating. Do you see any other challenges, especially when it comes to the digital medium?
So I think the volume of advertising on digital medium is definitely a challenge, not just for us, but for any kind of regulator in the country and even globally. Earlier you had a finite number of ads that were running on television or even on radio or print, but now probably that same volume is being released every single day. So from our point of view, yes, it is challenging to monitor the entire universe. So we focus on certain kinds of activities and certain kinds of priorities at different points of time. But yeah, I think so that's one challenge. And I think the other challenge also is that the formats of advertising are changing so rapidly, right? I mean, every day you have a new format which is emerging. So, whether it was reels or whether it was shorts, and then invariably you'll keep having newer formats that come up, and tracking them, monitoring them does become challenging. But on the other hand, we also then tend to deploy AI-based software, et cetera, et cetera. So technology does help us to keep pace with what is happening, but I would say that that definitely is a big challenge.
Following up on this, what are your views on misleading ads, and what do you think the ratio of misleading ads in the digital space are when you compare to ads on TV? Do you think the ratio is increasing or decreasing?
So I would say that's not necessarily a very fair question to put on digital advertising. Uh, so now TV advertising, of course, has had a much longer history of being there. It is more tightly regulated. It has a set of regulations. It has a set of people who are very experienced in that industry. When it comes to digital, things are completely, I mean, they open up, right? The scale of digital is 100 times that of TV in terms of the number of ads that you see on digital, perhaps even more. So I think from a ratio point of view, it's a little difficult to say, but yes, I think digital advertising, just because it has so many creatives, certainly is the largest source of misleading advertisements. I think we can say that with certainty. I'm not sure if we compare it with the ratio, because the numerator is large, but the denominator is also very large. So I mean, I don't really have a mathematical or a statistical answer for you on this one. But certainly digital medium is where most of the misleading ads are happening now. But that's, like I said, also because where most advertising is also happening now in terms of sheer number of creative units that are out there. And again, like I said, the medium itself by default is more difficult to monitor. There's a plethora of platforms, social media posts and platforms, news platforms. Every company has their own website, has their own handles. So just this proliferation of handles that one has to keep track of, I think is very difficult, and therefore the ability to track, monitor whether it's misleading ads or even other kind of objectionable advertising is definitely more challenging in digital.
Makes sense, ma'am. And do you believe that we as consumers are becoming more aware of how ads could be misleading, especially since we're a generation who has grown up on the internet with the TV? So do you think we're becoming more aware?
Uh, I think you are definitely more aware of certain kinds of violations. So when something is very overt, I think, you have the advantage of being able to call it out. But I think what is difficult is that today you are being misled in ways that you don't recognize. And I think that is the real challenge. For example, if let's say you go on a website and it, gives you a couple of options. Do you want to, do this or not? Do you want to proceed or not? Right. Now, certain choices are highlighted in colors. Certain choices are put in more prominent fonts, put in more prominent places, in the on your screen. certain choices may not even be shown to you. It's only if you click more, know more, scroll down, then other choices may appear that may be more reasonable, that those are the choices that you may prefer. So you are being misled in ways that you don't know. So while you may be a more aware generation, I don't think you're any less being misled, by certain practices, because those practices have also become more subtle. They are not as overt, but they can, lead you down a route where you don't necessarily know and you don't have the right information to make a decision.
So this, I mean, what you've shared, it makes me think of a documentary that I recently saw on Netflix, where they spoke about Amazon and how Amazon is always running like different models to test what will make us buy more. So I mean, when you say that, it makes me think of, yes, I mean, they are running it, they are tracking our movements. So I mean, I agree with you on that, that these are the things that I didn't really think about unless you pointed it out.
So, moving on to the next question with respect to misleading ads, how can you differentiate between a misleading advertisement and creative marketing? I mean, how does one make that differentiation? And what measures can one take to ensure that there is transparency in brand communications?
So creativity, exaggeration, are all ways in which advertising actually becomes more memorable, becomes more interesting and entertaining for us. And, that's also the objective of the advertisers to get noticed. However, not everything that is creative is misleading. Okay. So they are not the same at all, I would say. In fact, I would say that most misleading ads happen because, the people who are making them are perhaps not creative enough. I'll give you an example. Okay. I think all of you would have seen, some of the Fevicol ads, the iconic ads, which are trying to say that it's a good adhesive. I mean, that's essentially what they're trying to say. And they use things which are so exaggerated, right? Like an egg which will not break, or like, a wall, which is not breaking because of something. So which you and I both know that it's not really true. I mean, really, a hen that is eating out of grain out of an old Fevicol can is not going to give an egg that cannot break. We all know that. Along with the advertiser, we are entertained, we laugh about it. We are not misled to think that, right? So this is a great example of how things can be very, very creative. So another example, and again, a very famous tagline of Red Bull gives you wings.
Hmm.
You are not expecting that you will literally start flying, right? Or an oil, which may say that this oil is so light and it shows someone floating in the room. We all know that's not true. So what is exaggeration is that when it is evident to the consumer also that this is an exaggeration and you are not going to take it literally, that is creativity, that is exaggeration. But where they blend it in with something which actually you may expect out of a product. Okay, I'll give you an example. So we had some face creams, for example, that was saying that, you can get spotless skin. And when we asked for their test results, it showed that actually the cream could not get rid of all the spots. It reduced spots, but it could not get rid of all spots, right? So it was definitely less spots, but it was not spotless. And the argument that was used is, but this is a creative expression. Now, that is not a creative expression because the consumer could take that to mean that this is the result that I would get out of using this cream, and that is why they would put their money on buying your cream, right? So the difference between exaggeration and misleading, difference between creativity and misleading is where the consumer, along with you, also knows that this is not true. Then it's fine. So my advice always to advertisers is that you want to exaggerate, exaggerate like fully, go all out and exaggerate so that no one believes what you're saying, but they are entertained by it, or, your message becomes memorable. So I would say that's really the difference.
Makes sense. Ma'am, now we'll go back to one question or something that you already answered in one of the questions. And you spoke about how on the digital media there are a lot of ads and you use AI to track it, right? So we just wanted to understand now that there are so many ads that are coming on the digital medium. If you could tell us a little bit about how are you keeping track on them to ensure that they are following certain guidelines?
Sure. So I think, most of the self-regulatory organizations now in advertising, we do have softwares that allow us to track these ads, allow us to monitor what's happening. And all of this is required because, as we were just discussing, the quantum of advertising is just so, is just so massive. And therefore, this whole attempt to make sure we are keeping track of what is happening in the advertising world. Advertising is using AI. So much regulators use AI. So I think it's all about keeping track and making sure that you are able to monitor to a reasonable extent, or at least to what your objectives are. Like I said, I don't think anyone can now monitor 100% of what's happening out in the ad world. But how do we prioritize certain areas? So certain industries which we believe their advertising could be very harmful. We would kind of keep a closer eye on that, or we take note of more of bigger violations rather than all violations. So I think it's really using technology, using, of course, our expertise to recognize what is misleading about an ad when we see it. We have a very efficient jury system where if we send a letter to the advertiser, in some cases, so I would say in about 50 to 53% of the cases, actually, the moment they receive a letter from ASCI, they are willing to withdraw their ads. In some cases, they may want to contest, saying that, okay, we believe we have a good reason for saying this, and they may send us their lab data or whatever are their arguments. And then those cases go to a jury, and the jury is also a very diverse jury. It has people from the industry, but it also has, by majority, what we call civil society, which means they are people who are not directly connected with advertising. I mean, they are professors, lawyers, consumer activists, people who work with the development sector. So you have a really diverse bunch of people examining every ad and seeing whether they believe this is misleading or not. So whatever is the complaint, do we feel that that's justified, or do we feel the advertiser is able to justify the ad? So there is a very robust process that happens, because every time we ask an advertiser to change or withdraw an ad, of course, we understand that it has financial implications. It has implications of campaign disruption, etc. So we don't take it lightly, but we need to make sure that the consumers are also protected and don't have to see this kind of advertising which is not honest.
What do you think of the rising popularity of influencing marketing when you compare it with celebrity brand endorsements? Do you think influencer marketing has a higher impact?
So I'd say in some cases it may, and I think, I don't think there's a yes or no answer to this one. I think most brands use both. And I also think that the role of each of these is a little different. I mean, you normally would use a celebrity when you really want an instant kind of recognition, so you're really borrowing out of the stature or the brand value of the celebrity onto your product. So I would say that's when you would use celebrity. I think influencer marketing is particularly valuable, especially when you have to explain complex products. I mean, I think influencer marketing is really useful where they are breaking down how to use the product, what have been their own experiences, etc., etc. So, if you see beauty products, if you see fashion products, on how to put looks together. So I think influencer marketing really stems from how do you make the best out of the products that you're using? How do you select the right product? So I think those are more granular kind of details that I think do a great job of communicating with consumers, making them try out different things, etc. So I think the roles are a little different. And I don't think either of them is necessarily competing with each other. And I would say in most cases, brands who use celebrities also use influencers.
That's true. Ma'am, so ASCI is seen as the censor board of ads, right? And I think before in one of the answers, you touched on how some ads are so exaggerated that you know that they're not true, which is what makes it so creative, right? So what are some of the benchmarks that you think of goods and ethical ads, and some do and don'ts?
Sure. So I think the difference between us and a censor board equivalent is that the censor board pre-certifies everything, right?
Hmm.
So you have to clear the censor board before you can broadcast or publish. In our case, we don't do that. So there is no pre-approval that we do. Once the ads are in the market, and if we see there's a problem, is when we pick them up. So that's one essential difference to note. But yes, I think what is a good and ethical ad? I think any ad which says the truth is fine. Advertising can, I think there's a very famous saying within advertising world, which is truth well told. So at the core of it has to be the truth. And then the storytelling, how do you tell it in an interesting way, in a funny way, in a memorable way, is what gets added. But that truth cannot be touched. I mean, in the sense that you cannot make it an untruth in order to be entertaining or interesting or memorable. So to me, it's about what is honest. How do you say it? I would say that, some easy benchmarks are, if, you had to sell this to your family, what would you say to them? And, why would you have lower standards for your consumers than you would have for your own family? I mean, all of us are consumers too. So I would say that, claim as much as you can prove, go by science-backed data. So those are some of the things about the truth. But equally, I think creativity is the answer to good advertising. Creativity makes good advertising. So I would say, in fact, most of the creative ads, I would say, are not misleading. And, sometimes people say that, oh, but, if we don't have creativity, we can't exaggerate, then our ads will become very boring. And I always say that means you're not creative enough. You have to become more creative for your ads to be truthful and creative both. They are not on the opposite sides of a spectrum. They, in fact, go together very well. I think if all of us think of the most memorable ads that we remember or the ads that we really liked, none of those ads were trying to cheat us. And, we felt good about those ads because they related with us in some way. We found something, like I said, either entertaining or relatable in those ads. And it's not because they were trying to mislead us. So, yeah, to me, creativity and truthfulness is a very powerful combination for the industry, and that's what should be pursued.
So as we come across your Gender Next report, we also noticed how traditional gender-sensitive stereotypes in India, in Indian ads have evolved and they've become more subtle over time. So can you elaborate on the shift and how, and you can share your insights on how brands can work towards eliminating these stereotypes, particularly in advertising?
Yeah, so I think this is an excellent question, and I would also encourage all the listeners to really go through the Gender Next report and some of our other work that's there on our website. These are very, very nuanced and detailed reports and findings that we are happy to share. You're absolutely right that I think very overt sexualization or stereotypes has decreased a lot. Okay, we don't see as much of it as we did perhaps in the past. But subtle stereotyping happens because we are all blind to it. Okay, we see that in our daily lives. We see it in advertising so often that it just seems normal. We don't think that this is actually not correct. So it becomes a kind of template that brands just tend to follow. So I remember when we were talking to someone who's in the creative team, and she was saying that, it's just so normal when you think of in any ad when food has to be served, it's a woman who's holding a tray. No one else holds the tray in the house but the woman. And why should that be the case? So it is a question of, so how do you break these stereotypes? I would say one is having diversity on your own teams. If your team itself is not diverse, it's very unlikely that they will be able to think of solutions which are, reflect the kind of diversity and therefore the unstereotyping of the depictions we are showing. Who's behind the camera is as important as who's in front of the camera. So whose gaze are you using to see an ad? From whose gaze are the protagonists in the ad? What does a woman feel about seeing herself vis-a-vis? How does a man feel about seeing himself in the ad? What are the kind of dynamics there? There are also some really good frameworks available for you to assess your ads, take them through those frameworks. So they really help you guide, ask the right questions at the stage of even briefing the creative to the stage of creative evaluation. And there are several models available. The Gender Next report has an SEA model and the Triple S questionnaire score, which I think is a really fantastic set of questions to ask yourself. And it's a self-assessment tool. I mean, no one else has to do it when you're making your ad. Run through that checklist and see whether your ad clears some of those issues or not. The Un-Stereotype Alliance, which ASCI is a part of, also has some tools. So I don't think there's really any excuse, for getting better at this. We can, all of us have our limitations. We are all conditioned in certain ways. We all see things as normal, which are probably not very great. But we have to, I think the responsibility is on each one of us to educate ourselves to be better. And advertising certainly, impacts so much of what is happening in society that I think it's great that advertisers, feel the need for their ads to be less stereotypical. I think the other thing that I just want to add in this is that this is not just a feel-good thing. Okay, research has constantly shown that when advertising reflects the diversity of its consumers, it tends to do better because when I see an ad which has someone who looks like me doing a certain thing, then I say, okay, this is for me. But if I only see a very certain stereotypical person being able to do that, then I don't relate with it as much, right? So I think research has constantly shown that unstereotyping is good for business. And therefore it's a great thing for advertisers to follow.
Thank you for sharing that, ma'am. So before we wrap up this session, I have one last question. That this podcast is mainly targeted towards students who are in MBA, or let's say planning to join an MBA program, and they're interested towards advertising, which is why they've clicked on this video. So do you have any tips for the young career professionals who'll soon be joining this field, or are thinking of joining this field? So any tips or any words that you might want to share with them?
I think advertising creativity is a very exciting field, and so whether it's design, whether it's advertising, whether it's communication, whether it's filmmaking, I mean, all these are different components of advertising and brand communication. Uh, so I would say if you're interested in it, learn about it, pick up the skills, practice it. Um, and like I said, I mean, that's probably true of any field, but I think if you become good learners and observers of what's happening, if you're able to immerse yourself in those worlds, you will find that there is a lot to learn. Don't be afraid to experiment. There are in marketing, luckily, no right or wrong answers. So you can really push yourself, think about how you would do things differently. And I think bring an authenticity to your work. And I always say this that people who have multiple interests always do well in advertising, and that is because they see the world and they relate with the world. If you only confine yourself to your work and I'm great at writing briefs or reading briefs, eventually you will run out of ideas and you will run out of steam. But if you immerse yourself in the world around you, I think those people make great observers of the world. I think those are the people who come up with the real insights. So I would say that, I mean, do all the things you love, travel, eat, gain new experiences. Don't be afraid to bring them into brand and advertising communication.
Great. I think with that, we can wrap up this session. Thank you so much, Manisha ma'am, for joining us. It's been a pleasure hearing you talk. And as somebody who's so, I would say, who's so respected in her own field and who's been on the both sides of the table, it's been a pleasure listening to you. I know I have some reading to do. Once I leave the podcast, I'll read the Gender Next report, and I'll see more ads. And yeah, I mean, Gayatri, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I think this has been a very insightful podcast, especially because as we dive deep into the world of advertising, we also kind of miss out on these subtle references, subtle stereotypical references, which kind of have a severe impact. I mean, I remember I came across a LinkedIn post by a very famous, well-respected person in the industry, and he said how Chota being from a young age has had a somewhat of a negative impact on young girls. The stereotypical references to, girls having to be, meek and submissive, and the men always having to protect them in dire situations. And when we realize that the real world out there is actually not the case, you have to kind of stand up for yourself. It creates a very, very different impact in the minds of young girls, when they grow up and when they face the real world. So I think this podcast has been so insightful in that regard. So thank you so much once again for joining and sharing your insights. And we really hope that the audience, take away as much as they can from this.
Thank you. It was lovely speaking with both of you, and good luck to you and to anyone who's listening to this. Have a great student life, really the best time, one of the best times of your life. So, make the most of it. Thank you.
Great. Thank
Thank you so
you.
much, ma'am. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, ma'am.